welcome chosen ones. You can almost feel the shift the instant you step outside the version of you they had already scripted. It's subtle at first, then loud all at once. Not because you've done anything dramatic, but because you've disrupted something they relied on, predictability. And when that disappears, people don't know how to sit with it. They fill the gap with opinions, assumptions, and endless interpretations, trying to make sense of what no longer fits their expectations. It's not truth they're after in that moment. It's comfort. And when they can't find it, they create noise instead. Not because they grasp what truly shifted, but because speaking is the quickest way to steady themselves when control quietly slips away. That's why the silence never lasts. Messages start flying. Whispers turn into discussions. And suddenly, your name is circulating in rooms you haven't stepped into for years. Everyone feels the impact, but no one can quite define it. They try to label it, to box it, to reduce it into something familiar, but it refuses to shrink. And in the middle of all that noise, the truth remains untouched. They felt the shift, even if they can't explain it. There's a real psychological mechanism at play here. When people encounter something that doesn't align with what they expected, something that refuses to fit into their usual mental categories, the mind goes into tension. It's an uncomfortable friction, a need to resolve what doesn't make sense. Psychologists describe this as cognitive dissonance, where the brain scrambles to restore balance. And because uncertainty feels intolerable, it doesn't stay empty for long. The gap gets flooded with assumptions, narratives, humor, criticism, anything to make the unfamiliar feel explainable. Not because it's accurate, but because the mind would rather invent a story than sit with what it cannot immediately understand. That isn't awareness. It's anxiety amplified and broadcast like certainty. What you did didn't violate a rule. It erased the framework they were using to measure you, and that's what unsettles them most. People know how to respond to defiance, to disorder, even to failure. They have language for all of it. But a precise, deliberate move with no emotional residue, no need for validation, no visible struggle. That creates a pause they can't process. It's like the game is still in motion, yet you've stepped beyond it entirely, leaving everyone else trying to make sense of a move that no longer follows the rules they depend on. And here's the part that almost feels ironic. Because yes, there is one. Not everyone speaking is angry. Most are just unsettled in a way they can't quite name. It shows up in those awkward laughs, the sudden pauses, the half-finished sentences when your name comes up. You'll hear things like, "I can't explain it. It's just off." What they're really saying is that something didn't load the way it was supposed to. Their expectations froze, their assumptions glitched, and now they're left staring at a version of reality they weren't prepared to process. So now you've become the conversation, not because you demanded attention, but because you removed the one thing people rely on, predictability. Not because you justified your actions, but because you moved without needing to. Everyone has something to say, yet no one can say it clearly. And that's not coincidence. That's what happens when a decision comes from a level most people don't operate from. Certainty without approval. Stay with this, because once you recognize the pattern behind their reactions, the need to explain yourself quietly disappears. Before we step into the first point, take a moment right now. Tap that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like as your way of affirming that this message found you for a reason. Don't keep it to yourself either. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. You're not here by accident. You're here to recognize something within yourself and to take your place in this space. So make it known. Drop 444 in the comments and let your presence be seen. I always pay attention to those who show up. Now let's get into the first point. Number 1, you disrupted a pattern they were quietly depending on. Not openly, not consciously, but it was there. People may not study you the way they pretend to, but they observe just enough to build expectations. They note your pauses, your explanations, your moments of hesitation, the times you chose to stay instead of move. And over time, those small observations turn into a silent formula for who they think you are. But the moment you step outside of that formula, everything they thought they understood about you starts to unravel. Over time, you stopped being seen as someone evolving and started being reduced to a pattern they could run in their heads. A quiet formula took your place. If this, then that. If pressure, then response. If distance, then return. That predictability is what made them feel at ease, not true understanding. But the moment you acted outside of that sequence, the entire system collapsed. The confusion wasn't about what you did. It was about the fact that it didn't align with the version of you they had grown comfortable predicting. You didn't follow the script your past had written for you. There was no pause, no cushioning, no effort to make it easier for others to process. You acted without leaving emotional breadcrumbs behind. And that's what made it impossible to predict. The reaction you're seeing isn't about the outcome. It's about the disruption. People don't generate this much noise over failure. They do it when their internal shortcuts stop working. All those quiet assumptions they leaned on suddenly feel unstable. And now they're scrambling to rebuild a sense of certainty that no longer fits you. The version of you they felt confident about no longer exists in the way they remember it. And rather than admit their read on you was incomplete, they rush to reshape the narrative so it feels familiar again. That's where the interpretations begin. Suddenly you're being categorized, explained, turned into a topic of analysis, even turned into a joke or an unexpected form of admiration. Not because they've gained clarity, but because they've lost it. And rebuilding a story is easier than accepting they never fully understood you in the first place. When predictability vanishes, people don't pause to process the unknown. They rush to assign it a story. And what unsettles them most is how quietly it happened. There was no build-up, no visible transition they could follow, no signals to prepare them. One moment you fit their expectations, and the next you didn't. That kind of shift exposes something they'd rather not admit, that their understanding was never as deep as they believed. They weren't truly seeing you. They were just memorizing your patterns. And the moment your habits no longer serve as a blueprint, their sense of access to you quietly fades. That's why the reaction feels exaggerated compared to what actually happened. It's not just that you changed course, it's that you stepped outside the map they were using to navigate you. Now the volume rises, not out of clarity, but out of discomfort. The conversations aren't really about understanding you. They're about restoring their own sense of stability. You've made it this far, then something here is speaking directly to you, and that's not by accident. Take a moment to support the message by subscribing and leaving a like, not just as a gesture, but as a signal that you recognize the value of what you're hearing. Your presence here matters more than you think. Now let's continue. Number 2, you moved without waiting for anyone else to confirm it. Most people operate as if every decision needs to be co-signed, quietly looking around for signals before they act, reading expressions, anticipating reactions, adjusting themselves to stay within accepted lines. Their choices are filtered through approval long before they're expressed. But you stepped outside of that loop. You acted without checking the room, without softening your direction to make it more acceptable. And that kind of independence unsettles people, because it breaks the unspoken rule that decisions should be shaped by the comfort of others. They're not reacting to the decision itself. They're reacting to what it exposes in them. It highlights how much they rely on constant feedback just to feel grounded. You didn't look around for cues, didn't slow down to read the room, didn't adjust to keep things comfortable. You moved with certainty, trusting your timing, your reasoning, and the outcome without needing it echoed back to you. And that kind of self-contained clarity feels unfamiliar to most people because they've never operated without that external confirmation guiding them. So to them, it feels disorienting, almost unnatural. People rely on familiar frameworks to make sense of behavior, but what you did doesn't slot into any of the ones they recognize. The reaction is instant. They start searching for explanations, trying to trace it back to something predictable, something external. But nothing holds. There's no clear trigger, no visible influence they can point to. That's because your decision didn't come from outside pressure. It came from within. And when someone moves from an internal compass, their actions can't be boxed in or easily explained. That's why they keep circling back to it, replaying the moment, dissecting it, trying to build an explanation that makes it feel familiar again. But there isn't one that fits, because what you did didn't require external reasoning. Moving without seeking approval isn't ego or rebellion. It's alignment with yourself. And that's what unsettles them. It quietly highlights their own habit of second-guessing, of needing reassurance before every step. In that moment, they're faced with a realization they'd rather avoid. That all the checking, explaining, and overanalyzing they rely on isn't necessary. It's just what they've become used to. That's why they keep circling back to it, replaying the moment, dissecting it, trying to build an explanation that makes it feel familiar again. But there isn't one that fits, because what you did didn't require external reasoning. Moving without seeking approval isn't ego or rebellion. It's alignment with yourself. And that's what unsettles them. It quietly highlights their own habit of second-guessing, of needing reassurance before every step. In that moment, they're faced with a realization they'd rather avoid. That all the checking, explaining, and overanalyzing they rely on isn't necessary. It's just what they've become used to. It becomes a reflection they don't know how to face. What you did didn't just shift a moment. It challenged the beliefs they rely on to navigate everything. It introduces a possibility they haven't accepted, that someone can move freely, without needing permission, and still succeed, still evolve, still reshape outcomes. That realization unsettles them at a deeper level, because it means the rules they've been following were never absolute. You didn't just act. You revealed that progress was never dependent on approval in the first place, and that's a truth many aren't ready to confront. Let me pause you for a moment, chosen one, and remind you to support the message. Go ahead and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell and leave a like so you never miss a single transformative video. By doing that, you're not just engaging, you're claiming your place among the chosen ones here on Cosmic Chrysalis. Number 3, you stepped out of a role they had already written for you. It happens quietly. People meet you and begin assigning positions without realizing it. You're no longer just yourself. You become a character in their narrative. The reliable one, the one who bends, the one who absorbs pressure, the one who stays in place. They watch how you respond, how you hesitate, how you adapt, and over time, they build a version of you that fits their expectations. But the moment you move outside of that role, the entire script they created starts to fall apart. It was comfortable for them, clear, controlled, easy to navigate. As long as you stayed within that role, everything made sense in their world. But the moment you stepped outside of it, that structure lost its stability. Not because you did anything wrong, but because the storyline they depended on no longer applies. Now, they're left without a place to position you, without a way to rank or define you the way they once did. And that kind of uncertainty unsettles people deeply. It sparks confusion, resistance, and a rush to create explanations. Anything to replace the clarity they just lost. Breaking out of a mental role doesn't need a declaration or a dramatic reveal. There's no speech, no explanation, just a quiet refusal to keep playing along. You simply stop aligning with the version they were comfortable with, and that absence of performance speaks louder than anything you could say. Because in that moment, it becomes clear. They weren't relating to you as you are. They were relating to a version of you that fit their expectations, something easier to label, easier to manage, easier to predict. The reaction happens instantly. They rush to make sense of it, filling the space with theories, whispers, and motives that were never part of your decision. It looks like control from the outside, but it's just an attempt to rebuild a narrative that no longer belongs to them. Because the truth is, you've stepped beyond the role they created and into a space where your direction isn't influenced by their expectations, and that shift unsettles them deeply. It forces a realization they weren't prepared for, that the control they thought they had, the conclusions they drew, the way they defined you, was never real to begin with. Stepping out of a mental role doesn't just shift their perception of you, it unsettles their perception of themselves. Because when you no longer fit the image they constructed, they're forced to confront the limits of their own understanding. It reveals that what they thought was insight was actually assumption, that what felt accurate was incomplete at best. And that realization is uncomfortable. That's why the reaction intensifies, why the conversations don't stop, and why no explanation ever feels sufficient. Because the issue was never about you. It was about the illusion they had built in their own minds. If you've made it this far, chosen one, take a moment to subscribe to the Cosmic Chrysalis channel. Turn on the notification bell and leave a like as a way of affirming to your higher self that this message is meant for you. Your presence here isn't a coincidence, and the fact you made it this far shows so much of the loyalty that you have toward yourself to heal and protect and enlighten yourself. And chosen ones like you are favored by the Most High and the gods. So thank you, and God bless you for making it this far into today's video. We need more people like you that are committed to this journey, so please make sure to share this message with other chosen ones to help grow our numbers and spread the word of God and positivity to stand firm against liars and evil forces. Now, let's continue with today's message. Number 4. You acted in a way that didn't align with the version of you shaped by your past. People tend to anchor their expectations in what they have already seen. Every struggle becomes a reference point. Every vulnerable moment turns into a prediction. If they've witnessed you hesitate, they expect hesitation again. If they've seen you endure, they assume you'll continue to absorb. Over time, your history becomes the lens they use to interpret everything you do. But when you move beyond that, when your actions no longer reflect those old patterns, it disrupts the image they've been relying on. Because they weren't seeing who you are now, they were projecting who you used to be. When you move in a way that no longer echoes that narrative, it hits them like a disruption they didn't prepare for. It's not just unexpected. It dismantles the entire framework they built around who they thought you were. They were anticipating responses shaped by old wounds, reactions driven by caution or survival. But instead, you operated from a different place entirely. Not from fear, not from habit, but from clarity. Not reacting, but deciding. And that shift doesn't just catch them off guard. It forces them to realize that the version of you they understood no longer exists in the way they believed. That's what makes you impossible for them to define. It's not that what you did is complex. It's that it doesn't exist in the version of you they've stored in their minds. There's no reference point, no past example they can pull from to make it make sense. And people don't react this strongly to something ordinary. They react when their expectations fail completely. Their confusion isn't about your action. It's about the limits of how they saw you. They reduced you to patterns shaped by past struggles. And now they're faced with the reality that you were never confined to those patterns in the first place. What unsettles them most is the level of ownership behind your action. It reveals something they weren't expecting, that your past no longer dictates your present. They've grown used to believing that history controls behavior, that patterns formed in pain are permanent. But when you move beyond that, it disrupts more than their expectations. It exposes their conditioning. It forces them to consider a possibility they've avoided, that growth is real, that change is a choice, and that people are not bound to the versions of themselves shaped by old experiences. And that realization doesn't just confuse them, it challenges everything they've quietly accepted as fixed. And because they were never prepared to see that version of you, they default to noise. discussions, theories, endless attempts to explain what doesn't fit. They keep trying to force this new reality back into the old narrative, but it no longer holds. The framework is gone. You've moved beyond the version they stored and labeled, and now there's nothing for them to reference. That's why their reactions feel scattered, because they're searching for answers in a story that no longer applies. It's been a powerful journey through these revelations, and the fact that you've made it this far says a lot about you. So take this moment as a reminder. Subscribe to Cosmic Chrysalis, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like so more chosen ones can find these messages and never miss what matters. That's how this message spreads. Now, let's step into point number 5. Number 5, you let your growth speak through action instead of words. While most people feel the need to announce every shift, to explain their progress and seek acknowledgement for it, you moved differently. You didn't pause to narrate your evolution or package it for approval. You simply became it. And that's what sets it apart. Because real growth doesn't need an audience to be valid. It shows up in decisions, in boundaries, in silence. And when it's demonstrated, instead of declared, it carries a weight that no explanation could ever achieve. What they don't realize is that real transformation doesn't seek the spotlight. It draws it without effort. You didn't need to declare anything or build anticipation around a new version of yourself. There was no performance, no need for recognition. You just moved differently, and that difference spoke for itself. In your decisions, your responses, even your silence, there was a clarity that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. The kind of shift that doesn't need to be explained because it can be felt. That kind of growth leaves no room for argument. It doesn't rely on explanation, and it doesn't wait to be understood. It simply exists, beyond prediction or negotiation. That's why people keep talking. They're trying to process something that doesn't fit within their usual boundaries. They reach for labels, for categories, for anything that can make it feel manageable. But nothing quite holds, because what you've become isn't something that can be reduced. It moves outside of definition, and that's exactly why it unsettles them. What makes this so unsettling for them is that they've been conditioned to recognize growth only when it's performed. They look for visible struggle, dramatic turning points, or explanations wrapped in conflict, something they can measure and understand. But you moved beyond all of that. You didn't present your evolution for evaluation, didn't argue your case, didn't try to prove anything. And because of that, their usual ways of measuring progress fail. They're left witnessing something real but unfamiliar, and that creates a mix of quiet admiration and deep frustration they can't quite explain. By embodying your growth instead of declaring it, you changed the entire dynamic without effort. There was no announcement, no negotiation, just a quiet shift that others had no control over. Now they're left watching, trying to interpret something they can't influence or redefine. That's why the conversations start, the theories form, the need to explain intensifies. They're attempting to make sense of a reality that doesn't match the narrative they've held onto for so long. But the truth stands on its own. Your growth isn't something performed for others. It's something they're forced to recognize. It pulls back the curtain on the patterns others quietly depend on, exposing how much of their understanding was built on assumptions, routine, and their own limited perspective. That's why it feels so hard for them to explain, why it creates that sense of urgency and confusion. Because what they're witnessing can't be reduced to words or logic. It's not something you explained. It's something you embodied. And no explanation could ever carry the same weight as the shift you have already become. If you've made it this far, you are one of the few who are truly committed to the path of self-love and self-respect, and that deserves recognition. I salute you for staying present and open to this journey. And before we step into the final point, take a moment to support the message. Subscribe to the Cosmic Chrysalis channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single insight. Now let's move into the last point. Number 6. You no longer shape your emotions to fit what others expect to see. Most people rely on emotional cues as a kind of reassurance. They look for visible reactions to confirm that everything is unfolding in a familiar way. There's an unspoken expectation that feelings should be displayed on command, matching the moment, so others can feel oriented and in control. But you stepped outside of that pattern. You didn't perform for the room, didn't offer reactions just to maintain comfort. And that absence of predictable emotion unsettles them because it removes the signals they depend on to interpret reality. When you step out of that performance, the entire emotional rhythm they rely on falls apart. You quietly reject the unspoken agreement that your reactions are there to reassure them. You didn't respond on cue, didn't rise to provocation, didn't adjust your expression to match their expectations. There was no exaggeration, no softening, no display designed to make things easier to read. And in that stillness, they're left without the signals they depend on, forced to face a version of you that doesn't translate through their usual emotional patterns. Your emotional independence unsettles them because it reveals how much they've been depending on others to guide their own reactions. They used your responses as a reference point to feel grounded, to feel certain, to confirm that everything was unfolding as expected. But when you stopped offering those familiar cues, you became difficult to read. You no longer fit into the emotional patterns they rely on to navigate interactions. And in that absence, where their expectations used to be met, a kind of quiet panic begins to surface. This isn't detachment. It's precision. You're no longer reacting on impulse or performing for perception. You're deciding what deserves your energy when it's expressed, and whether it's expressed at all. That kind of control isn't common, and it disrupts the assumptions people carry about how emotions should operate. They try to decode your calm, to assign reasons to your restraint, because it doesn't follow the patterns they're used to. But what they're really witnessing is something unfamiliar to them. Emotion guided by intention, not by expectation. The shift happens instantly. Conversations start looping, judgments multiply, and people revisit every interaction, searching for something they missed. A signal? A weakness? A reason that makes it all make sense. But nothing quite fits. Because what you've revealed isn't a hidden flaw, it's a boundary they can't cross. You've shown that emotion isn't something to be displayed on demand. It's something you choose to own. And in doing that, you didn't just protect your inner world, you redefined who gets access to it. You've uncovered just how much of their world depends on predictability and unspoken expectations. And once that becomes visible, it's impossible for them to ignore. You didn't just move beyond what they understood. You dismantled the structure they were using to define you. Now they're left trying to rebuild meaning through conversation and speculation. But none of it restores what was lost. Because without that framework, they're no longer in control of the narrative. And that's where their discomfort truly comes from. Congratulations, chosen one, for making it all the way to the end. That alone says something about your awareness and commitment. If today's message resonated with you in any way, I'd genuinely love to hear it. Your voice matters here. You can share your thoughts or simply drop 444 in the comments as a sign that this message reached you. And before you go, make sure to subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you never miss our daily insights, leave a like, and share this with other chosen ones who need to hear it. Thank you for being part of this space. Have a powerful day, and may you continue to move with clarity and purpose.